We're going to switch up to Romanesque architecture. So, as just a brief introduction to the Romanesque architecture, the word Romanesque means that it descended from Roman. Okay? But one of the things that's really important to not do is not to confuse Romanesque with Roman. Okay? And because it contains the word Roman, people just assume that it's the same thing. But the architecture of the Romanesque is the architecture of a medieval period. Medieval period being the Middle Ages, and it comes after the fall of the classic Roman Empire. All right. Most of the forms that you're going to find in Romanesque buildings are going to look like you could make them out of like kids' blocks. So it's not that they're simplistic. They are in no way are they simplistic, but they are composed of these sort of basic shapes like cylinders and spheres and cones and pyramids and things of that nature. And so it becomes kind of this compositional thing. The buildings are somewhat modular. That is, that they have repetitive elements in them. Okay. One of the things that you'll notice when you start looking through the buildings is that it literally comes from a combination of the Byzantine architecture and the architecture of the Roman Empire. But one of the things that I want you guys to kind of be looking at is that it doesn't have the sophistication of the classic Roman Empire. Okay, when you look at like sculpture and you look at the sort of artwork that's associated with it, you're not going to find that Greek and Roman sort of finesse, the perfect human body that's kind of in motion, right? There is a loss of those abilities and technologies as we move forward through the ages. So in addition to being kind of blocky and made from repetitive elements, it's known for its massive quality. It's a very heavy architecture. Some people can also sort of say that it's kind of the architecture of castles. So if we look at the Walt Disney Castle, it's got little turrets that kind of look like this. All right. So in order to kind of understand how the Romanesque developed, right, we've got to kind of look at the context, the political and social context that drives this form of architecture. So the decline of Western Europe occurred after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And it becomes really important to distinguish the Eastern Roman Empire from the Western Roman Empire. Okay? If you remember, we looked at a slide last time, and we'll look at it again as part of this presentation, that sometime around 400 AD, the Roman Empire was split into the Eastern and Western Roman Empire. 76 years later, the Western Roman Empire falls. And the Western Roman Empire is predominantly associated with Western Europe, what today would be Spain, England, France, Germany. Okay, the Eastern Roman Empire is more closely affiliated with lands that would be like Turkey and the Ionian Islands and the Greek mainland. Okay, so this quote comes from one of the books that we kind of reference. It says, like, the decaying tissue of classical civilization grew ever weaker, and between the 6th and early 10th or early 8th century, the Roman Greco culture, that, remember, Rome looked to Greece for a lot of what they looked at as the scholarly aspects of themselves. Okay, it completely disintegrated, and it didn't happen like all at once. Right, the Roman culture continued to exist, but it was a fairly pronounced period. Over the period of 300 years or so, the culture was pretty much gone. So this period in history is going to run from the fall of the Western Roman Empire through the beginning of the Renaissance. So it's about 1,000-year time period, from about 476 to 1400. Okay, the first 300 years of this medieval period are often referred to as the Dark Ages or the Dark Age, and it's the time period where there was a complete loss of the Roman technologies. There was a loss of most of classical literature. There were the invasions of the people coming in from northern Europe down into the Mediterranean region. So there was this kind of loss of things that occurred over that time period. And in that 300-year period, one thing that's important to note is that trade, commerce, learning, cities all pretty much come to a grinding halt. The barbarians are invading from the north, and the Roman Empire just falls apart in that time period. Those 300 years from about 476 through about 800 AD, right, end with the coming to the spotlight, or coming to the fore, a guy named Charlemagne. Okay, Charlemagne becomes the sort of leader of the Franks, and around that time, Charlemagne is appointed the Holy Roman Emperor. And it becomes really important here, again, to distinguish the difference between the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, the Holy Roman Empire is what it was established by Charlemagne and the popes, right, after the fall of Rome. It is not a pagan culture. It is a culture based on Christianity, and it's definitely not the same thing as what we think of when we think of classical Rome. All right. One thing that's important to understand is that after the fall of the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire flourished. It lasted another 1,000 years until it was sort of taken over by the Turkish Ottomans in about 1400, about the beginning of the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance. So I put together a little kind of timeline here that kind of shows the ending of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of what we should call the European Middle Ages. Okay, and if you look at it this way, the Western Roman Empire was looked at as being the sort of beacon of science and commerce and shipbuilding and all sorts of things, right? And it wasn't until the Renaissance comes along in the 1400s that you get that resurgence in interest in the sciences. So the Middle Age component, like I said, has that 300-year period at the beginning, and it's a slow decline leading up to Charlemagne's sort of coming to power. Okay, if we take a look at that image that we looked at from last time that shows the division of the Western Roman Empire from the Eastern Roman Empire, it kind of tells a story when we look again, and what we're focusing on is the area of Western Europe. Okay, when we look at the next image, we see that sometime around 800, when Charlemagne comes to power, what used to be one major area ruled by Rome becomes this sort of broken up set of kingdoms and empires, and there's this mixture of people. By this time, there's complete sort of fragmentation. There is no consistent rule of law in the area that used to be the Roman Empire. All right. Looking at some of the characteristics or things that happened as a result of the fall of the Roman Empire, trade was brought almost to a complete halt. There was no longer people bringing in goods from different regions and trading. Everything becomes feudal. Not futile, but feudal. Pretty much people grow a small amount of food. They hunt when they can, if they own or can go to lands where they're allowed to hunt. and there is no urban life, or the cities disappear. We talked about Rome during the Roman Empire as having a population of over 1 million people. And we saw the images of that model that shows this massive city, right? That population drops down to under 50,000 by through the Dark Ages. Where there was a common language or common languages of Latin and Greek, those languages disappear. Okay? They're replaced with all of the languages of the invading barbarians, and there is no consistent communication between the various areas that are occupying Western Europe. The idea of mass agriculture, the idea of importing wheat or importing sea products from the sea, right, comes to a complete halt also. By this time, whatever food you're gathering kind of locally. All right, it's not being imported. You're not buying olives from the Middle East or something. You're basically growing whatever you can, farming whatever you can. There's a spread of anarchy and war that occurs across Western Europe. Okay, since there's no rule of law, there's no overarching sort of government that's taking care of things. It becomes a sort of free-for-all. That disarray, that mess, right, extends itself into architecture. All right, there's a complete loss of Roman concrete construction. That it ends with the fall of Rome. That people just don't use it anymore. They don't even know how to use it. The idea of creating these massive spaces that we saw as part of the Roman Empire in the basilica forms comes to a complete close. The idea of this integrated architecture that has a set of rules that are related to the human body goes completely away. There is no monumental planning of anything of any level of sophistication, particularly in that 300-year period following the decline of the Roman Empire. So one of the things that's important to look at, though, is that the consciousness of classical Rome endures. It isn't forgotten. And the reason is that there's buildings scattered all over Europe that they can't build anymore. It'd be like looking at a bunch of alien spaceships scattered all around California and like being in awe of those things. You might have been the person that defeated those aliens, right? But you certainly can't replicate their technology. And that's something akin to what we might look at in people of these barbaric tribes that are settling into Western Europe, kind of looking at these buildings and going, my God, I mean, we can't even replicate that. And let me see, I've got a few minutes. All right, so I guess I better stop it right there because I don't know how many more slides I got left.